Smarties, today we are continuing our 4-part series about accommodations. This is part 3. 2 episodes ago, in episode 347, we chatted about what accommodations are, why they're important, and common misconceptions about them. And then last week, in episode 348, we discussed why some accommodations don't work as intended, despite the best of intentions. And in today and next week's episode, we are digging into our favorite accommodations and discuss why we like them and why they're useful. If you are interested in partnering with one of the clinicians or with us at our respective practices, we would love to have a conversation with you. To sign up for a phone call with my practice, go to my website, www.kappedtherapy.com. That's K as in kite for Kapp Ed Therapy. And we specialize in executive functioning skills challenges for 5th graders through adulthood. Steph's practice is My Ed Therapist. And you can sign up for a phone call on her website, which is www.myedtherapist.com. They do all the things and see clients in person local to them in Manhattan Beach and Redondo Beach, California, and virtually everywhere. My practice, Kapp Educational Therapy Group, is completely virtual. Let's dig in.
You want to learn faster, but sometimes working harder is just not the answer. You have to learn smarter. The Educational Therapy Podcast.
Hi, Smarties. Welcome to episode 349 of Learn Smarter, the Educational Therapy Podcast. I'm Stephanie Pitts.
And I'm Rachel Kapp.
And today we're going to talk about the first 5 accommodations that we really like and why they're effective.
All right. We kind of broke this down in big themes. So we're going to talk about the first big theme of accommodation, which is executive functioning skills support. So Steph, what are some of your favorite accommodations for executive functioning support?
So access to organizational things, right? So planners or apps, or sometimes when teachers don't have use for a computer or whatnot, that they're allowed to go into their Google Calendar on their school computer during class to write down their homework, things like that can be accommodations that work really well. Or if they need to take a picture of the board, that works really well. And some teachers don't mind, and some teachers it needs to be an official accommodation. But then things like breaks between tasks to help focus and help if they need to go to the bathroom or get a water break, things like that, the teachers allow when it needs to happen to help kids refocus on what they need to do. And the other thing is having a checklist or some sort of visual that some teachers do on the board or send out in an email or put on Google Classroom about what they're going to be doing so that they can actually look and see how to manage their time during class. Let's say the teacher gives them the class period to work on a project in their group. Having directions about what they should be able to get done by the end of the period is extremely helpful for a kid with executive functioning challenges.
Well, you'll hear this, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, that accommodations often given to learners with a 504 or an IEP or an individualized student resource plan are accommodations that would likely help the whole group as well.
100%. I think the other thing to add is sometimes I've gotten accommodations for kids when a teacher wants an individual notebook for that class and the kid is someone who loses things and can't keep track of it. And so being able to not have that separate binder for that one particular class, and have everything be all in one place, which is what we advocate for, can be extremely helpful. So these are just some examples, but why are they effective? The goal is to help them stay organized and reduce overwhelm. So really what we're talking about in this episode is, yes, here are some things that work, but really we need to get curious about the why. Why is the accommodation helpful? And for these kids that struggle with executive functioning, they're not organized and they are easily overwhelmed because everything is everywhere. So this reduces that.
Yep.
All right. So what's the second one?
The second one are some of our favorite reading and writing accommodations. So here's what I'll say. We kind of put these together. Generally, you want to really separate out reading and writing, but because they are two mechanisms, and just because you're a strong reader does not mean you're going to be a strong writer. and vice versa.
Yeah.
So there's just that. Although certainly being a reader will help inform your vocabulary.
For sure.
To be a strong writer. But they're two different functions in the brain. They're not one and the same. But as Steph always says, usually learners who struggle with early reading might have something else that shows up later down the road. That being said, I've shared on the podcast, I was a struggling reader, but I don't think I had later challenges along the road. But Steph, you were a struggling reader.
Mm-hmm. And a struggling writer.
And a struggling writer. Because you didn't know what the end result was supposed to look like. And that's still sort of a thing. So that's how we fell in love in grad school. But anyway, so some of our favorite accommodations are text-to-speech software for reading assignments, but also for writing tasks as well.
Yeah, speech-to-text or text-to-speech?
Speech-to-text for writing, text-to-speech for reading.
Yep.
Any opportunity we can make something auditory that's not dynamic, that's flat on the page is a great idea. We also will add that we love text-to-speech while the student is reading. Both of those things simultaneous is our favorite.
Yep.
The reason that text-to-speech and speech-to-text can be so meaningful is because it gives learners who might have a lot of barriers to accessing the materials, it removes some of it. So making things auditory, allowing learners to sort of talk through, it removes some of the challenges that they may have if they have a reading disorder or a written expression disorder or a processing disorder or an attentional disorder. We're trying to remove the barriers that those disorders create for these students.
If we're talking about something like math, having fewer things on the page.
My fave.
Since we're talking about reading and writing, still having fewer things on the page can be extremely helpful. Fewer questions, put them on a different page.
You know what's so funny is when we're feeding the boys food, Adam will load up the plates with food. And my feeling is it looks overwhelming. Let's reduce the amount of food and just fill as they go. I think they're more likely to try things. If there's blank space on their plate, it's just funny that has like crossed over.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So the third thing, this is an important one, but it doesn't look like something that is a traditional accommodation that you might think of. Things like sensory breaks and movement. So this is having access to sensory friendly tools like noise canceling headphones, like we talked about in the other episode, where if there isn't a classroom that's quiet and they need to take a test, noise canceling headphones might help that. Having fidget toys is extremely helpful for a lot of kids. Scheduled movement breaks during long activities, letting them get up and walk around or do something, and quiet spaces for self-regulation if they need it. So why is this effective? It helps the students with ADHD or autism. Honestly, it helps them with overload. And then they can maintain focus. Sometimes it brings them back. Sometimes I say to kids, okay, let's take a jump it out break. They jump on the trampoline, they come back, and boy, can they focus.
Yep.
So while that's not feasible in all classes, sometimes having things like PE in the middle of the day rather than at the end of the day might be a really effective accommodation for a student, so that if they have their hardest class right after PE, they might be more able to focus. So things like that.
You know what else I love?
What?
For this accommodation? You know those telephones that you can talk into and hear your own voice?
Yes.
Those are great for sensory kids to be able to manage their own thoughts. All right, let's move on for testing accommodations. So here's where I want to preface this accommodation. We're going to talk about extended time because that seems to be the most common one.
Yep.
Extended time works great to removing the anxiety that a timed exam can create for a learner if it's interfering with their ability to show and demonstrate their knowledge. Where extended time isn't great and isn't the most useful accommodation is when there's attentional challenges and a learner isn't thorough in their responses on an exam.
They rush through.
So sometimes parents will think, my kid struggles with attention, let's give them more time. And it doesn't actually benefit them. And it just creates more time that they waste, frankly.
Yeah. That's one of the things that we work on in educational therapy is helping them be aware and learn how to use that time wisely, because some of them really actually need it. It can be very successful if they know how to use it wisely.
Yes, but extended time in and of itself isn't going to solve all the world's problems.
Correct.
We also love reduced distractions and learners taking tests in a quiet space when it's feasible. I also would love to add in, I think it's actually wise if they take the test at the exact same time that their peers are taking the test. There's a lot of data that shows that time of day matters, and frankly, location matters as well. But obviously, we can't have them taking a test at the same time as their peers in the same space as their peers, but at least at the same time, ideally. It's not always feasible, but that's one component I love. And then, of course, alternate testing formats, alternate ways to demonstrate your knowledge. One thing that can be really tricky is a Scantron test.
So tricky.
And so just circling the answers on the exam itself, as opposed to having to transfer the answers onto the Scantron. Showing your knowledge through oral exams and sharing that way can be really meaningful too. We want to reduce the stress to allow students to demonstrate what they know and remove those barriers so they can.
For sure. I've had a student who, it was a math test and they were supposed to do it on a separate piece of paper, and she kept copying the problem down incorrectly on the separate sheet of paper.
Exactly.
So when we got the accommodation that she could actually write on the test, then she started getting A's.
Yep.
And I have to say, I'm just going to throw this in there because I actually mentioned it yesterday to a parent and I haven't thought about it in years, but a little like random tidbit. Back in the day, I needed an accommodation when I was in 6th grade because I broke both of my arms at the same time. Okay?
How did you do that?
Rollerblading.
Okay. I broke my arm roller skating. So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Another quinky dink. Go on.
So, okay, both of them. Okay. So I couldn't write 6th grade. I mean, you can just set the stage right there.
So you were like with both arms. I'm imagining you like one of the Brady Bunch people with both arms like up.
Yeah, but it didn't have the pole to like hold it sideways.
Okay.
I know what you're talking about. No.
You're just,
okay,
like running.
My casts were purple.
Of course.
Apparently, I woke up crying hysterically because I went in with one broken arm, and then they found when I was under anesthesia that the other one was broken as well because my mom told them to check because I wasn't using it.
Hold on a second. What do you mean you were under anesthesia?
They had to put the bone back. They had to manipulate the bone.
Oh, they had to do that for mine too, but they just did it in the office. They gave me some like powerful drug. I remember me standing there and he was a family friend just like kind of moving it back into place slowly.
Oh.
And my mom was like holding my head up.
How old were you?
I broke my arm on the day of 5th grade graduation. So I was 10.
Okay. So I was in 6th grade. So about the same-ish time.
Yeah.
No, they had to physically move it back into place. And it's just above my wrist in both places.
Oh.
Both arms. Anyway, the accommodation that they gave me, because I couldn't write.
Yeah.
So I had a friend taking notes for me in class, and I got to take my tests orally. And I remember.
Do you love it?
I did so well.
Yeah.
Because I could talk about all those things versus writing out short answers.
Yeah.
I remember I got an A on it, and I was like, this is the best way to take a test I've ever had in my entire life. So anyway, that's a little extra special story about me.
I just learned something new about you. I did not know that you broke both wrists.
I talked to a parent about it yesterday, which is why it was in my brain.
So you woke up from the anesthesia.
Yeah.
And both your wrists were casted?
Well, I had one up to my mid-arm on my right, and the other one on my left was just before the elbow. One was elbowed and one wasn't.
Oh, man. And then how long were you wearing your cast?
6 weeks.
That's a long time.
6 weeks. And then I think for both of them. And then I think I had another cast for the one that had to be manipulated back. I think that one was longer, maybe.
Fun.
Yeah. Anyway, there's my story. Okay.
All right. So those are our testing accommodations. Steph loves an oral exam. Moving on to number 5, Steph, classroom and instructional accommodations.
Okay. So preferential seating, we've talked about this before. Sitting near the teacher is helpful, but also sitting away from distractions. sitting away from their best friend, sitting away from the kid that makes a lot of noise or has, some sitting challenges or things like that. Some kids, that is really what they need. Other kids might need to sit near their friends because their friends are very focused and it brings them back to being focused and wanting to do the work as well. So it really just depends on the kid. But also notes.
Oh, uh-huh.
Having either a classroom note taker or the teacher having notes that the kids can get. They usually have that for kids that are absent, but even if it's not about being absent and just getting the material twice is so much better for so many kids. Having just more time to interact with the material and seeing it again. Like so many parents call and say, my kid doesn't take notes. Well, the problem most of the time is that the kid is trying to take in the information the first time they're hearing it. For someone like me, it's very hard to do that. And I'm trying to focus on understanding it and getting it on paper. That's why I never wanted to be the secretary in any scenario, because it's hard for me to do both simultaneously. So having that is extremely helpful for a lot of students. And sometimes modifying workloads to focus on the key learning objectives. So what does that mean? It means maybe not doing 25 math problems of the same thing. Maybe it's doing 5 or 10. So why is it effective? It improves, like I said, their access to it because they see it multiple times and can comprehend it better. And this is for kids that have attention challenges, processing challenges, things like that. It can be extremely helpful. So that's the first 5.
So be sure to tune in next week to episode 350. We're going to talk about technology and social and emotional support and homework and all those goodies. So have a great week, Smarties.
Have a great week.